Today we'll talk about continuous murmurs. We have already discussed systolic murmurs and diastolic murmurs. Systolic murmurs occur during the ventricular systole when there is a flow happening either to the great vessels, corresponding great vessels, or to the atrium, corresponding atrium. The diastolic murmurs happens when the ventricle relaxes and the pressure goes down and blood re-enters back to the ventricles from either of the great vessels or from the corresponding atrium. It means that the systolic activity and the flow should end before the diastolic flow happens. Only after the flow ends, you can get the other flow. That means you can clearly make out the second sound. So you may have murmurs in both phases, to and fro murmurs, but one should end before the other should start. Is there a possibility of a flow happening irrespective of the ventricular activity? What the ventricle is doing, is it contracting or relaxing? The flow is happening independent of that. If such a situation, you may get a flow during the second sound. You call a continuous murmur when there is a murmur at the time of the second sound. Most of the situations, the peak of this continuous murmur is happening at the time of second sound. How can it happen? The ventricular contraction systole should end and the flow should stop, then only the other happens. So continuous murmur means that the ventricular activity, systole or diastole, is not affecting the flow. How can it happen? Basically, there are two situations and two possibilities. When the mitral and tricuspid valve are closed and the wall is set, where you can't feel the ventricle whether contracting or relaxing, for the atrium or the veins during the period when this is shut, if there is a flow happening between them, it won't be depending upon the ventricular activity. So there are situations of continuous murmurs and flow happening between the veins of the right and the left side, pulmonary veins and the SVC or IVC, or the left and right atrium when the AV valves are shut. These are not common, but that is one of the bases. The second situation, when the seminar valves are cut off, shut, up, closed. The systolic flow is not happening, diastolic flow is not happening. But in that situation, there is a flow happening continuously, which is happening beyond the seminar valves, independent of this activity. Because these valves are shut, the flow is independent. Such a situation also, you will get a flow, most of the time, completely obscuring the ventricular activities, independent of the ventricular activities. That is, in short, the continuous murmur. You just see first sound, second sound, next first sound. This is systolic, this is diastolic. This is a systolic murmur. It's an ejection systolic murmur, pansystolic murmur, hollow systolic murmur, whatever it be. All this end by the next second sound. Then diastole is free. Here it is the other way. It's a diastolic murmur, the systole is free. So the leak is happening during the diastole. Here the flow is happening during the systole. This is the classical continuous murmur. The flow starts somewhere after the first sound. The flow peaks at the time of the second sound. It continues and to the diastole. Our concept of a continuous murmur was it should be lasting from the first sound over the second sound till the next first sound. There is no need for reaching to the next first sound. It may be variable length in the diastole. Only thing is that a murmur which has an onset in the systole should be going over the second sound into the diastole. That becomes the continuous murmur. The basic need is that there is a flow happening during the second sound. So it is ignoring the ventricular activity. So that is the basis of the production of the continuous murmurs. So what are the situations where you get this flow? Classical one which all of us know is the major communication between the aorta and the pulmonary. The pressure difference makes the flow from the aorta to the pulmonary happening. So this independent of the ventricle. After the ventricle has delivered the blood of stroke volume to the aorta, it's full and it should be dissipating systemically, but there is a low pressure system connected and blood diverts to the pulmonary artery and the flow continues over irrespective of the systole or diastole. Second thing, if you go a little ahead, the branches of this and the branches of this one can get connected. So that can happen in the context of PDA or in the absence of PDA. This can serve as a source of blood circulation to the pulmonary arteries. This is one of the commonest situations of decreased pulmonary flow synovial heart diseases. There is no source of blood to the pulmonary arteries by the atresia or a critical pulmonary stenosis. No source of blood to the pulmonary artery. So this will serve as a source of blood to the pulmonary arteries. Main aortopulmonary collaterals. You call it as MAPCAs. So it can be anywhere, very proximal, very distal. So it can be somewhere, any site in the lung, deep inside, or maybe somewhat proximal. So main aortopulmonary collaterals. So don't confuse it with some other thing. This is another situation where you can get this. It's the pulmonary AV fistula. The branches of the pulmonary artery is getting connected to the pulmonary vein. That's a different thing. This is a connection between two arteries. This is a connection between one artery and a vein. So this is the one situation, very important. This will lead to a tinge of cyanosis. The oxygenated blood is not reaching the pulmonary, the alveoli to get the oxygen, just bypasses to the vein. So this is an entity which will lead to cyanosis. This is an entity which will improve the cyanosis because it increases the pulmonary circulation. So you just list the common possibilities of continuous murmur taking into consideration. So there can be a very rare situation of a connection between the pulmonary veins and the systemic veins. Can lead to a continuous, very lower grade flow can occur. There can be a situation of flow across this one continuously in a case of mitral stenosis and an ASD. So mitral stenosis means it's almost shut. That the murmur will be continuous irrespective of the systole and diastole. That's Lutembacher syndrome. That again is not a common entity. And some of these situations where you create an opening, that's can okay. Then comes the PDA. Then comes the connection between these two. So there are a lot of other situations where this sort of a connection between the great vessels happen outside. Just to list one, coronary AV fistula, coronary artery and coronary veins getting connected can lead to small flow continuously. It's a low flow situation. You can get a sound, don't know, it won't set up a vibration. Coronary and a direct entry into the atria or ventricles on the right side, cameral fistula, coronary cameral fistula. So that again is possible. And other thing is an AV fistula or an internal mammary flow. You can get an internal mammary flow continuously getting. Then any of these situations where the vascularity is high, tumors anywhere. So the very same situation you call it bruit in the periphery, same continuous the flow is happening. So any situation where there is a connection between these two, that can be a continuous. Very interesting thing. This sort of situation can happen due to your created things. All of us know we are connecting the pulmonary artery branches and the aorta in a case of cyanotic heart disease, palliative shunt. So shunt can produce a continuous murmur. So these are the commoner reasons for a continuous murmur. So now comes, how will you differentiate one from the other? So that is basically by the general examination and clues in the CVS examination. So what are the things which you will look for in the general examination which may give a clue? I'll tell, is there a tinge of cyanosis? Second one, what about the peripheral arteries, peripheral signs of hyperdynamicity? Third thing, I'll look for a thrill. The last thing, where is the murmur and what is the characteristic of murmur? So these are the 4 points. Now I'll come to one more rarer thing after I finish this thing. So how these points will differentiate? If there is a peripheral sign of collapsing sign, Dumoset sign, all the hyperdynamic circulation sign, what does that mean? It's a communication is between the major levels. So they can occur in the context of the continuous murmur due to a connection between the great vessels, PDA. Rarely you can get this sort of a situation with the main aortopulmonary collaterals also if it is a larger one. Okay, it's possible. Then a tinge of cyanosis means what? Either there's a cyanotic congenital heart disease where the continuous murmur, either PDA or MAPCAS, is supporting the pulmonary system. Another possibility is it's a pulmonary AV fistula, where the location of the murmur helps. So tinge of cyanosis help you, peripheral signs will help you. The peripheral sign will never occur in a case of minor communications. The internal murmur is so full, coronary AV fistula, none of these things produces a systemic leak. And the next one, where is the murmur? The PDA murmur classically will be heard in the left, if it is a situs solitus, just below the clavicle. It's a little higher than the pulmonary area. So it can be heard on the right side if it is a dextrocardium. So what is the peculiarity? If you are getting a thrill, it's clear. None of the other situations produce a thrill. Only when there is a communication between the larger vessels you get a thrill. So none of the internal memory so full, the AV fistula produces a thrill. So thrill is important. Then the location and the character. The harsher quality, multiple clicking qualities in the murmur argues for a PDA. PDA murmur is so peculiar. It is having eddy current. The flow through the PDA is producing some sort of a eddy currents. You'll get a clicking quality. That's very important. And next, the site of the murmur, if you get some odd situations, the infrascapular area, if you're getting, it's a pulmonary AV fistula usually. So tinge of cyanosis and an odd situation, continuous murmur, you look for. Consider pulmonary AV fistula. You need to investigate by contrast echo or MR angiograms. Then about the thrill location. And location is very important. Few other situations which you need to consider is the venous hum. I said the continuous murmur proximal to this one. One of the commonest situation is a venous hum. You will get in the right very root of the lung. How will you look for? You look for always in the sitting position. In the lying position, this will disappear. In the sitting position, turn the neck to this side and little bit of extension you auscultate here. So you will get a continuous flow. The importance is that you can abolish the murmur flow by the compression of the jugulars. Then by turning the neck to the side, it can disappear. So something which can be abolished by the related to the neck movements and the pressure, something will disappear on the lying down. On the right side, it is a venous, such a harmless thing, it can occur in anemia also. So, lot of situations, benign and significant ones, you can get a continuous murmur. So, continuous murmur doesn't mean that it can occur only alone. So, there are combinations. You can get a systolic murmur separate and a continuous murmur. BSD, PDA is a combination. ASD, PDA is a combination. So, just because the continuous murmur is there, don't stop with that. You look for the other signs. Another very interesting thing, occasionally you may get a situation of hemoptysis. Hemoptysis. What is the relation of the hemoptysis? Another very interesting thing is a pulmonary AV fistula in the context of a Rendu-Osler-Weber syndrome. So you may get an odd situation, continuous murmur. What are the clues? You look at the nails, you look at the lips and tongue for the smaller clues of a episodically bleeding vessels. So that's very interesting thing. And one or two interesting bedside test is pulse oximetry in the lying and sitting position, orthodeoxia. You just go through those things, interesting things. One very important thing, what will happen to the continuous murmur when the pulmonary hypertension develops? When the pulmonary hypertension develops, what will happen? The flow is happening during the systole and diastole, because both systole and diastole, the pulmonary arterial pressure is below the aortic. When the pulmonary pressure rises gradually, what will happen? The length of the murmur gets shortened. Length of the murmur gets shortened, and at a point the diastolic component totally disappears. So a continuous murmur becomes something like systolic murmur, and you can clearly make out the second sound. It's becoming louder. So situation of no flow during the diastole, second sound become clear and louder and louder. A situation will come when the systolic flow also is not there. The pressure goes up and equalizes. There is no flow during the systole also, and then maybe the systolic murmur will disappear. So there is no flow at all from the aorta to the pulmonary arteries. When the pressure goes high, you will get a very loud second sound. Then all the other evidence of the pulmonary hypertension comes now. So what are the other evidence? Second sound loud, narrowly split, and you may get another rejection systolic murmur due to the pulmonary hypertension. You may get another diastolic murmur due to the Graham steal. So interesting course evolution of the continuous murmur in the case of PDA when it develops a pH sequentially. So in short, what did we tell? The commoner reasons of the continuous murmur, we remember only the PDA, but lot of other situations you get a continuous flow murmurs occurring not due here itself, around anywhere in the chest is possible, not directly due to the cardiac thing. It's mostly at the setup at the vascular level. So the investigations are also needed, and clinically you may not be able to make out by the clinical examination or even by echo, because echo you see only the ventricular chambers and you won't be able to analyze the great vessels. The continuous murmurs occurs outside the heart usually. So thank you.